the High Agency Podcast with your host, Noah Ravoy.
We live in a time of an unprecedented failure in parenting. On one hand, we have the helicopter parents who don't allow their children to do anything without permission and are constantly watching them, supervising them, and essentially being on top of them like a helicopter. Then we have single parent homes where children are ignored, or even when they have both parents, we have disconnected parents who don't spend time with their children. And between these two extremes, we have a lot of other dysfunction as well in parenting today, unlike perhaps we've ever had in history. And today we're going to talk about that, but also what we can do to be high agency parents, to be peaceful fathers in particular, since it is fathers that should be taking the leading role in parenting in the home. Welcome. My guest today is Anthony. How do you say your last name, Anthony?
Last name is Migliorino.
Migliorino. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, Anthony. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Noah. I look forward to the conversation, and peaceful parenting is definitely an important topic.
So what does it mean to be a peaceful father?
So it sounds permissive to a lot of people, but really being a peaceful father is a lot of what you just spoke about in the intro. It's about having principles with how you parent your kids. And the peaceful part comes in where we're removing negativity. We're removing any elements that could harm our kids for having success in the future. So to be peaceful is in lines with negotiating, removing punishment, removing really any form of discipline. And I know that's a tough subject. It's something that people can't grasp their mind around. We need to discipline our children. We need to keep them on course. Absolutely. But with peaceful parenting, we apply sound principles and we guide our children and we put them in a direction that's going to ultimately have them become the best person that they can be.
You know, one thing that I use to explain this to a lot of people is I say that if you are using command to make children behave, and that can be disciplining, it can be punishing them, whatever it is, and we're commanding children to behave a certain way, what we're teaching them is that as long as we're there, they must behave this way to avoid negative consequences. But we're not there most of the time. You know, children go off to school sometimes. I mean, I homeschool mine, but even I'm not standing in front of my kids right now. You know, they get a little bit older, they start going out, and at a certain point, they're adults, they go off on their own. And that if you are a peaceful parent, instead of a command structure, what you do is you help the children to internalize those principles that you mentioned earlier so that they're self-regulating, high agency children instead of essentially setting them up to be robots for authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the big distinction is we get worried. We're afraid that our kids will be out of control. But to me, there's nothing greater than having freedom in childhood, to allow your kids to make mistakes, to fail, to take self-ownership. And I think that's a good part of it is with fathers. We need to have self-ownership, right? We need to not be emotional when things go wrong. We need to have enough trust and confidence in ourselves to not be reactive, to not punish our kids, to not hit them, especially if we're going to tell our children when they're little. You know, if you have two kids playing and you're going to tell your son or your daughter, don't hit that other kid. How can we, as a parent, discipline our kids by hitting them also? So we lose a little bit of integrity in ourselves. And I think if you don't stick to principles over time, your role as a father is going to be diminished. Your role as the leader in the family, because you lose that integrity. How good can your word have meaning and be truth if you're not living by it, if you're not showing it to your kids and allowing them that same freedom?
Absolutely. A lot of internal stress that people have, their anxiety about life, is because they've been told one thing and a different thing has been demonstrated to them. And they have this cognitive dissonance between the two things inside their mind. And that stress is them trying to alleviate that. My father and mother say they love me, but then they also hit me. Yeah. They tell me not to hit other kids, but then they hit me. They tell me not to hit my brother, but they hit him. And this creates that kind of cognitive dissonance in people, and it really sets them up later on to be very vulnerable to manipulation by other individuals. So almost all manipulation works on creating that cognitive dissonance in you, so that you just go, look, I can't figure out what I'm supposed to do. Just tell me what to do. And there are points with children where sometimes you have to tell them step by step what to do when you're teaching them something. And if you leave it at that, they will never truly learn. They'll learn the mechanical process of doing something, but they're not going to learn the principles behind how to learn. If you want to teach a kid how to clean up a room, you don't say to him, clean up your room. You say, okay, come here, pick up that thing. Okay, take that over to your box, put it in the box, and you go through the steps. But then you have to explain to them what that is, what we just did. Oh, that's cleaning the room. This is why we clean the room, so we don't trip on our toys. And that way our toys don't get broken. And you go through this process of explaining the principles behind the mechanical skill that you trained them to do. And once they understand those principles, it's very powerful. One of the things that many parents say to me is, look, I was hit by my parents and I turned out fine. How would you answer that to people who might be thinking that?
Well, I mean, I think the goal as being a father and being a parent is we don't want our kids to turn out fine, right? We want them to thrive and to become exceptional adults. We want them to be successful. We want them to have a family and a life that is better than ours. And there's a reason why people attach the word fine to that statement. Right? And as far as all the studies that have been done on spanking, on hitting, on corporal punishment, there is not one professional or study that has said that spanking has a positive effect on the psychological, mental, and emotional health of your child. So I know a lot of times we like to think outside of what the science says, and we criticize studies, and which is fine. But when there's no evidence showing that it doesn't have a negative aspect, I think you would rather not spank your kid now than find out 20 years later if it's true or not, right? We want to make sure we're doing the best that we can as fathers right now. We don't want to see the effects of that later show up. I mean, and the results, the studies, it's astounding how bad it really does affect our kids.
And one of the things with a lot of studies why they're hard to believe is because they don't match up with what we know and understand from other aspects of science. But with hitting children, it actually matches up pretty closely with what we understand of the human stress response system. And the human stress response system has been fairly well studied. And especially in children, when the brain is still forming, it's very important to not have intense periods of high cortisol production around learning. It basically blocks you from learning. And there's a very good reason for that. If a child undergoes some terrible, life-destroying trauma, they will have this rush of cortisol, which blocks their memory and makes it hard for them to remember that, so that trauma can't continue to hurt them into adulthood. However, if you're trying to teach kids things and you're causing them physical pain by hitting them, or even emotional pain, often it's more the emotional pain. My son's pretty tough. I could probably whack him pretty hard. He wouldn't care about the pain. He'd be like, what did you do? Why did you do that? It would be the emotional, like, my dad just hit me. Why did he do that? That would bother him. And what happens is they get this rush of cortisol, and everything that you say around that situation, not just after it, but before as well, because long-term memory only forms over time, it's gone. It's erased. They literally can't learn from that situation. The only thing they learn is avoid the source of pain. Now, you spank your kids people are spanking their kids from babyhood onward sometimes. And
Yes,
you're spanking them. They become teenagers, and now they don't want to talk to you about their problems anymore because they associate you with a negative experience. You're the source of pain in their life.
We're setting ourselves up for failure.
Absolutely. And the reality is it's actually, little kids are pretty easy. It's when they start getting a little older and things become more complicated. And, mostly little kids, you need a lot of energy for them. When they get older, you need a lot of skill to parent them, because now their problems are more complex. They become more complex. Their life is more complex, and their problems are more complex. And if we've set them up to avoid confronting us, then we're not going to be able to be enough of a part of their life to have a positive effect when they get older. A lot of teenagers, they just won't talk to their parents. I've had clients like that. Can you talk to my daughter? She just won't talk to us. She won't tell us what's wrong.
That's been built up over the years.
Yes. It's not sudden. I don't know what happened. Just suddenly she won't talk to us. It's like, no, it's not suddenly. It's the dam.
That's what we're told.
Yeah, you've loaded her down so often that finally it just broke and she decided to stop talking to you. But it's the accumulation of emotional pain over that period of time that led to that. And all relationships tend to be like that. People will be forgiving until a point, and then they stop. And for young people, it's often as they're getting close, they're getting into their teen years, they're starting to become more independent, they have other people to talk to. So now they don't feel forced to talk to their parents anymore. And if there's no love-based relationship there, they just stop.
Yeah, and we make excuses as a society. We say that it's a phase, it's a teenage phase. And I truly believe that if you're parenting peacefully from when your child's born and you're creating a healthy attachment with them, as they get older, right? When they're small, they're dependent on their parents. So if you abuse that dependence, if you're instilling fear in them through punishment or through spanking, you're not creating connection. You're breaking that attachment. As they get older and they become teenagers, now when things are really on the line, when they have serious problems in life, they're going to go to their friends for advice, because who didn't want to hear them, or who was abusive when they really needed help? So it's a real destructive pattern. And I think especially fathers need to see it. In my home, whenever there's a problem, my kids are coming to me, right? I'm the first set of authority. And this was created over 23 years. My oldest daughter is 23 now. And there is not a time or an instance where I would back away from that. I open the challenge. Whatever the problem is, I invite it, right? I accept my daughter. I have unconditional love for her. And, my kids are taught that we need to face things. We need to overcome obstacles. And the one person who's always going to support them in that is me. Obviously, their mother too, but I'm just talking in context with fathers. This is something that kids are missing these days. This is something that's desperately needed.
Absolutely. It is not, one of the big questions too I get is from single mothers, is that they know their sons need masculine influence and they don't have a father in their life. What would you suggest for these women, and also for men who are, maybe they've raised all their kids, and maybe they can be part of the solution for this now, is going back and going into their community and helping with these children? What kinds of solutions do you think can help for that?
Well, I mean, the single mother issue is huge. Fathers are, as men, as young boys, we're told that we're dispensable, that we're not worthy of having any value in the world right now. This is a constant theme. But as far as single mothers, I think the best thing that women can do is to continually raise the standards within themselves, and to find a quality man who's going to help with their children. And, that's something that's also frowned upon in society, of other men getting in relationships with women who have kids. I think it's something that we need to probably overcome. And we need to realize that we're building communities, we're building environments where the best thing we can do, or what we should be doing, is what's best for children. So, as far as the whole single mother thing, I think that women need to improve who they are. And I think that will attract a quality relationship with a man. And this is how you repair those families, right? Because we sometimes we don't have control over how that plays out, whether it's a widow or it's an unforeseen circumstance. So I think men need to band together. We need to encourage that. We need to encourage the strength of what a family has to offer.
Yeah, historically, it was actually pretty common that people died from random diseases, and there were a lot of fatherless young men and women. And we actually would, it's why we had the idea of godfathers and godmothers, was to provide a backup set of parents. But society itself was a lot more masculine as well, and so there were places where young men could go to get disciplined and by that I mean find structure for them to follow. And that really doesn't exist very much right now. Some churches might offer that, but that's to a large extent gone. And for us as fathers, we're providing almost all the structure that our children are going to get. And this is much more, I think it's actually more difficult now to be a father than 100 years ago, when the child had a whole structure of what was expected around them. They could go to church and see the other men at church. They could go to see how their friends were also being raised. They could go to see, basically societal expectations were fairly homogenous and uniform. And it made it a lot easier to raise children because there was, in the absence of choice, it's easier to make a choice when you got, only a few choices. Nowadays, it's more important than ever that fathers are creating that set of structures and set of guidance and that intimate connection with their children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back in the days, there was a more sense of a community. There was a more of a natural hierarchy where fathers understood their role and mothers understood their role better. I think we've moved away from that, so you don't have those communities anymore. And I tend to take it even a step further. So even if you have a father, even if you are a father and you're in a home, I still think that we need to raise those standards even more. I think that's the key element to combat fatherless homes, is if we can have fathers be consistent with their morality and act and live with virtue in the home, then you're almost going to create a vacuum where other men want that, right? They're going to see these good relationships and the bonds, strong bonds being created with kids. And it's going to create competition where, look how good that family's doing. Look how good those kids are. Look how successful they are. And I want that. Instead of what we see now a little bit is we see, they tell women they don't need husbands. They can have families and kids without a father in the home. I think the way that we combat that is by living it with ourselves. And a lot of the fathers that I speak with, we go over these principles and we try to get them to remove the destructive behavior and start the peaceful with principles, and parent with principles, and bring that peace to their home. And it becomes more about changing the dad than actually changing the kid. So I definitely see, probably in the next few generations, if we can provide a good example of what healthy and functioning families are supposed to look like, I think we will see a shift towards that. It's going to be something desired.
Absolutely. You said that. That's interesting the way you put that, something desired. When we can make having children and raising them peacefully a high status occupation, you might say, once it becomes high status, it's a lot easier to motivate people to make the changes that need to be made. People will do they'll buy bigger houses and bigger cars and bigger everything for status. And that external display of status is not particularly satisfying. And I think a lot of people are realizing it's not satisfying. And right now we're in a position where you can't easily show off that kind of status. It's becoming kind of a faux pas to overly demonstrate your wealth. It's like, oh yeah, you're just bragging about money's easy to make in this current time. And so you can make money. Great. That's kind of like a beautiful woman that can find lots of men that want to sleep with her. It's like, that's not really that hard in 2021. Oh, you can raise, you can have a stay-at-home wife and you can raise a bunch of really good kids that are happy and healthy and well-adjusted and have a good connection with you. Okay, that's status. That's hard to do, and therefore that's worthy of status.
Yeah,
I think this is the change that we need to see in society to make parenting once again. It was like that in the past. Essentially, if we look to the status of society, the higher status you were had a lot to do with how your family was run. Higher status people spend a lot more time with their family. They spend a lot more time training their sons. I have friends that are I'm living in Europe, and they're in the aristocracy here. And I'm talking to them about their relationship with their kids. And I'm talking to some of them about their childhood. And they spent most of their time with their father. It was extremely important to them. Even though these are people that, they work a lot, they're successful economically, they really don't brag about that. They brag about their kids and how well their kids are doing and how happy their children are and successful. Because they're so family focused, they have maintained an intergenerational link over 1,000 years here in Portugal, for example. They can trace their lineage back. They have real family honor and family pride, and we have to start returning to that again. We lost it basically at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. People moved around, they lost their roots, and we're now at a point where we can rebuild that.
Yeah, and I think that starts with us as men.
Yes. Yeah.
And it starts in our own homes. We tend to externalize everything. And like you said before, that the status of a man was, throughout history, men have competed with other men for resources. And what that's turned into is materialism, right? We want the next car, the bigger home. And we've moved away from that family structure because current monetary policies, the Federal Reserve, everything has made it harder for men to provide. Now the wife has to go out and work. So I think it starts with us. And I think when we can realize that in our own home, and we can realize that we're creating this society, like we said earlier, when we are diminishing the value of our sons and daughters, of course they're going to grow up and they're going to be submissive to authority. They're going to listen and obey whoever is directing them, even if it's through immoral causes. So where that comes into parenting and how that's going to shape society is if we can have these conversations among men where we're talking about how we can raise better kids and how we can do it peacefully, how can we negotiate with them, how we can guide them and teach them. And at the same time, it doesn't make them weak. It doesn't make them a person who's not going to be motivated or useful in society. It does the exact opposite. It teaches our children to be resilient, to not just obey, but have some sort of intrinsic motivation that's driving them, to give them meaning and purpose in life, as opposed to just doing what their parents want.
Yeah, you mentioned obey. This is one of the things that parents will tell me that, okay, so if I don't hit my kids, how do I get them to obey me and do what I want? And you mentioned that you had to deal with some men that they were spanking their children. They weren't peaceful parents, and you helped them to transition. So what do you transition them to? Like, what do they do if they can't force, this sounds terrible, if they can't force compliance with a belt? How do they get the kids to obey that? I mean, the kids must be climbing up the walls and smashing things, and how do they get them to obey? You would
think that if we stop forcing them and hitting them, that chaos ensues. But it's actually the opposite. It's when you remove the physical force, when you remove the threats, what happens is, as a man, you have to open yourself up to be more creative. You have to find better ways. And this works in every element of our life as a man. Whenever we remove the negative, it forces us into discomfort. It forces us to do things that are difficult, that are hard for us to do, that we weren't, used to prior. So with a lot of guys I work with, once the first thing is to take away the hitting. That's the first step, to remove the physical force, the physical violence. I mean, it's common logic. We're a lot bigger than our kids usually. And when you have power over somebody, you never want to abuse that power, especially if it's a physical force. But what I see a lot of is when men have information on what they can do better, especially in parenting, that's going to lead them to make better choices. It's the same thing with fitness or eating proper nutrition. When you're giving different tools on how you can improve yourself, And the great thing with parenting is you improve yourself, but it also reflects to your kids. So now, instead of the threats or instead of the punishment, instead of putting them in a timeout, we look to connect and bring them into our world. We look to have our kids attached to us in a healthy way, right? We don't want to be a helicopter parent, but we want to be able to offer them advice and help when they do have discomfort. In the same way that if you had a friend who was going through a hard time, right? A good friend offers comfort. We offer support. What happens is when you build that relationship, now you can be truthful and honest. So when you collect your kids like that, when you have them to trust you, then you can start being a little bit more honest. And as they grow, you can offer advice. You can tell them when they're messing up. And it's not going to be seen as a threat. It's not going to, your kids won't see it as dad hates me. They'll say, hey, you know what? I've trusted dad for years. And now he's telling me some truth. I need to listen.
Yeah. And, a lot of times parents will talk about, I got to create consequences. Well, nature creates most of the consequences that children need in order to learn. And a simple example is take my child or my son when he was about 2 or 3 to my in-laws place. And I would say, you can have 2 cookies. Okay. But of course, mother-in-law gives unlimited cookies because she wants to be well liked. So she gives the kid unlimited cookies. And instead of sitting there going, look, I said 2 cookies, and fighting with him about it, what I said you can have 2 cookies. If you eat more than 2 cookies, you're going to feel sick. You're going to puke. He's like, no, I'll be fine. So he gorges on cookies and he feels sick. And then he puked out all the cookies that he ate. And then he didn't want to touch cookies for about, 2 or 3 months after that, because he reminded him of how he felt before. And he moderated his consumption for about a year. And then he tried that experiment again of unlimited cookies. Found out again, yep, dad's still right. His advice is still right. And it was interesting because he then said to my mother-in-law, he said, you let me have as many cookies as I want, and that's not loving. You should have only let me have 2. You should have told me when I got too many. And now he actually craved that advice. He wanted to be reminded, oh, only 2 cookies because you're going to get sick. And he will tell me, like, he'll sometimes come to me and say, Dad, you got to let me know when I'm doing something that's irritating, because I don't want to become irritating and then not have any friends. So you got to tell me when I'm doing something that's like not socially acceptable. And he'll come to me and ask for that advice. And anyone that gives advice for a living knows that people who ask for advice and they come to seek it, they're much more likely to take the advice than when you foist it upon them and say, here's my advice, whether you asked for it or not. And it really makes a huge difference in the willingness to listen. And our goal isn't to get children to obey. He said, how are you going to get my kids to obey you? It's like, well, if you want them to obey you, what happens when you're not around anymore? They're not going to have anyone to obey. Who are they going to obey? They're going to obey somebody, some authority, because that's how they run their life. I don't know what to do. I just got to look for someone that tells me what to do. And that's what we see with a lot of people today. What's acceptable? I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to see, oh, that's what I'm allowed. These are the words I can say. These are the words that, Congress comes out with a list of words you can't say in Congress. I can't imagine that happening like in the founding fathers era. I can't imagine that happening because you had people that were very, very high agency, independent people. And you're going to tell me what words I can and cannot say. This would have been unthinkable. Well, now it's because we have this generation of people raised to obey. They've been obeying their parents. They obey at preschool. They obey through school. All they do is, how do I be a good obeyer and get brownie points for being good? What we want our children to do is to not obey us, but obey righteous principles. And that means that you need to understand the principles and internalize them. And, my son, he internalized the principle that if you eat garbage, you're going to feel sick. It's now and it extended beyond the cookies. It's to candies, to everything else. He has a moderation of his diet. He says, I'm going to eat. He says, he'll say to other people, you got to be careful what you eat. or you're going to get fat. And if you're fat, then you're not going to be as attractive, and you won't, he said this to his friends, and you're not going to get a nice wife. He says women don't want to marry fat guys. So he's like, you got to, so he's internalized this concept that your life will be different depending on whether you eat healthy food or not. And this is what we want our sons to do, or especially our sons, our daughters as well, is internalize all these concepts so that when we're not there, they can make rational, high agency decisions.
Yeah, of course. I mean, he learned an important lesson in self-awareness, and he also learned to have empathy for himself, to see himself in the future and say, hey, I need to do good things for myself now, because when I get older, that's going to have an effect on me. And if you don't allow your kids to make those mistakes, they're not going to pick up on that lesson, and they're going to constantly struggle with making the same mistakes, or they might not even proceed to take a risk because they're so afraid of failure, because you've controlled every aspect of their life prior. And I think that's one thing missing from what we acknowledge as parents these days. Our kids are so much more controlled now than they've ever been. And we think the opposite is true. We think that kids are running around crazy and careless and can do whatever they want. But the truth really is that we've become so low value and weak-minded as men in society that we have to control every aspect that our kids do. We don't allow them to make bad decisions because we don't want them to be in pain, or we don't want to be seen as the bad parent. And we care what other people think. So that's something else that even affects our kids growing up. If they see dad saying, hey, how come dad is always telling me not to embarrass him, right? Don't act stupid, or don't be lazy. And we're doing it because we care what people, shitty people we don't even know think. So when they grow up, it's going to have the same effect on them. How could it not?
Yeah, speaking about children and freedom, I remember Bill Whittle saying, he says when he was 12 years old, he'd take his dog and a backpack and a bunch of cans of beans and a sleeping bag and a shotgun and go off into the woods in Florida and spend a week camping by himself at 12 years old. Nowadays, if you see a 12-year-old kid out past, dark, and he's not with his parents or on the way to school, someone phones the cops.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the prisoners escaped. Get the cops over here right away. We're treating children like prisoners. We literally this last year have locked them in their home. They're under lockdown, just like a prisoner. And we wonder why they're so stressed, why they have such high anxiety. Children today are under tremendous anxiety. And then when children are under anxiety, they react to that. They don't always react the way we want them to. And, I say this to my wife sometimes. You have to understand he's been locked in the house. I get him out every time I can, but we've had weeks and weeks of pouring rain. I said, he can't go to the park he likes to go to because they closed it down with lockdown. He can't go. We can't take him out to the beach and go swimming because the beach is closed due to lockdown. And so he's going stir crazy. You can't lock a little boy up. There's millions of little boys and girls locked up all over the world right now. You can't lock them up in the house for weeks at a time, only let them out to run around in front of their house and expect them to be healthy. And so we're, as fathers right now, we have to have that patience to realize that our kids are under a lot of stress and how to deal with that. And even if our kids have an ideal life, they're going to be bumping up against kids that have a lot of trauma. And some of that's going to rub off on them, and they're going to bring that home, and they're going to have to have help to deal with it. And if we're pushing the kids away, they're not going to come to us with these sensitive issues. They're going to be afraid to.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, I know within my family, like I was saying before, when I've created an environment where when there are difficulties, there's struggles, my kids come to me. I make sure I'm the first person that they seek help from. And that's what you want. That takes a long time, but you have to create it. You have to be willing to put in the work, and you have to be able to offer that to your children. Like you said before, there's a lot of kids who come from homes that are broken that they get physical, emotional, sexual abuse. There's a lot of mistreatment of children in this world. And you don't want your kids to be attached to those people and looking for them for guidance and comfort. That's where you can lose your kid. That's when their minds can be infiltrated and they can start thinking about bad things. This is where we get, a lot of kids can get caught in depression and they become a victim almost. It's like a victim mentality instead of seeing the world where it's open to endless opportunities and you can go out and you can create your life and you can create what you want. The opportunity is there. They get trapped in a victim mentality and they think that life has to be painful. It has to be hard. A lot of dads, they make excuses of hitting their kid or punishing them because they say life is tough, right? I'm teaching them to be tough because they're going to face it in the real world. Well, I would say that if you want your kids to be able to face difficulty later on in life, give them the tools to accomplish that, right? Don't make them afraid that they're going to get their ass kicked or that bad things are going to continually happen. Give them the tools, give them confidence, and let them be proud of who they're becoming, even though it's difficult. So it's a tough lesson to learn. It's a tough lesson to let go of.
Yeah, one of the things that'll make our children tough is that they can internalize our voice, and when they have struggles, they can have kind of a conversation, so to speak, with us, even if we're not there. I can think of, I was raised around a bunch of my great grandparents and their brothers and sisters, so I had a lot of older relatives. And I spent enough time around them that I know what answer they would give to most of the kinds of questions that I would ask. And so sometimes when I'm thinking, what should I do about this thing? I'm thinking, what would my great grandfather say about this? And I can kind of remember what he would say. And so our children, they will also internalize what we say. And if what we say to them is, you're stupid, and why are you always messing up and all of this, that's the voice they're going to internalize. If you're not good at anything or whatever it happens to be that people yell at their kids when they're angry, that's the voice they're going to internalize. And now they're up against a challenge and someone's yelling at them, telling them that they suck. No, that's not going to make them stronger.
The language we use in our home is very important. And
yeah, that's the one thing people think of peaceful parenting. Okay, I stopped hitting my kids. That's a great start. It's a good start. Yeah, it's a good start. But there's more to it than peaceful parenting than not hitting your children. It's good to not do that, but we also need to not be verbally violent with them either.
Yeah, well, like I said, the language is important. And we want to speak to our kids where they grow up and they're confident, right? That they're real certain about who they are as a person and what they're going to allow other people and how they're going to allow other people to treat them, right? We want them to be confident with that. They might not have any idea what they want to be when they grow up, and they'll figure that out later on in life. But we want to make sure that the standards that we hold in our home, how we speak to them, how we treat them, all come from a place of virtue, a place of goodness, of respect. We want to show them that we're going to be courageous as fathers because we're going to do hard things and we're going to learn how to parent them better. So this all is the building blocks to the foundation of the relationships they're going to have in the future, right? If we don't offer this love and this kindness and this respect to our kids now, when they get older, they're going to allow people who are really bad people to affect them and to guide them in bad places they don't want to be, because they don't have that understanding that they are important, that they are strong, and that they're capable of doing things independently without being attached to some person who's just feeding off of them and getting their needs met all the time. We have the opportunity to teach them what a healthy relationship is right now.
Yeah, I think that's important. Even if we are a single parent, we can still teach them what a healthy relationship is by having one with them. Not just, if we're married, of course, they're going to see the demonstration between us and our wife of a healthy relationship. But we can also demonstrate that between the way that we relate to the children as well. Most of the people that I coach that have they're in a relationship that's unhealthy, a non-reciprocal relationship, almost always one of the first questions I ask is, if it's a man, I'll say, describe your mother, and he'll describe what is exactly the same kind of abusive behavior that his current fiance or girlfriend or wife or whatever is doing. And I'll say, do you ever notice that there's maybe some connection there? Wow, I never thought about that. It's like, yeah, you basically married your mom. And that's why you're on, and you're able to tolerate that behavior because you were essentially brainwashed into thinking it was normal. But you're unhappy, and you can't quite put your finger on what you're unhappy about, but there's something there that's unhappy. And it is almost always goes back to that parent-child relationship. Even men, their relationship with themselves has a lot to do with the relationship they had with their father. So if their father didn't really invest in them and didn't care enough about them to teach them things, they're likely to not care that much about themselves and not invest in themselves and not take care of themselves, because they got that signal at an early age that, yeah, you're just not worth it. You're not worth my time. And I think this is a big part of the problem. One of the things we say, okay, don't hit your kids, don't yell at them, but peaceful parenting also means don't ignore them. You need to invest into your children that time. It is not peaceful to ignore your children. There is some studies that show that social isolation can be as painful to people as torture. It's literally like torture. And I see these kids, out in public, and they're like, mom, dad. And the parents they got their phone on their phone. And the kids are desperate for their attention. And they're, mom, dad. You can see the stress on these children. They're like, what if this was something important and I couldn't get your attention? They're a little kid. They could be choking to death, and they're trying to get their parents' attention. And it really scares the children, and it makes them think they're unloved.
Yeah. And the truth is most grown adults can't handle the abuse that we inflict on children nowadays. Humans desire that connection. So what I always say is, if you're in a bad relationship with your wife or a spouse, one of you has the opportunity to leave. You can get out of that bad relationship, and you can go make a better life. The problem with our kids, they never choose to be our kids, right? We have them, we bring them into the world. So we have a real strong moral obligation to be the best parents that we can be. And we can't make excuses. There's this strange idea that we can hit kids, but we can't hit our spouse. We can go and put kids in a timeout and not talk to them for an hour. But if anybody ever did that to us, we would never talk to that person again. So, to me, it's about having high standards, and that starts with yourself. Like you were saying before, the relationships that we had with our parents, they shape and mold us. But as we become adults, we have that chance, that opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I don't want this in my life. I want to make it better. I'm going to work on these aspects. I'm going to work on what a healthy relationship is. I'm going to work on my self-esteem. I'm going to get my ass to the gym. I'm going to build a strong body. I'm going to read books. As we become better, this opens up the doors to our kids where they can see us taking care of themselves. So if we're not really dialed in on how we're treating them, everything that we're doing means nothing, because we have to give that same self-love. We have to teach our kids that they matter, that they have to, that they have to be connected to themselves. This way they won't let people mistreat them. And the bad part about that is, if we're the ones mistreating them, they'll never learn it.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, creating that strong bond with them so that then they come to you. And I often think that relationships are, if you imagine it's like a bank account, and you have to put in investment more than you take out, or the bank account becomes bankrupt. And there are times when you do have to correct your children. You have to say, look, that's not acceptable behavior. This is how you have to do it differently. And that can be painful. And there are times, even if we're peaceful parents, where we're going to make mistakes. We're going to, lose a little bit of temper or whatever. And we're going to, more often than not, it's not a mistake of doing something we shouldn't. It's a mistake of not acting when we should. That tends to be even more common because we should have given that kid more attention, or we should have done something with them and we didn't because we got busy or distracted. Well, if we're taking out from that relationship all the time withdrawals, and we're not putting in a lot more than we're withdrawing, it eventually goes bankrupt. And that's the point where the kids disconnect from us emotionally, and they become emotionally dead. Once a child can emotionally disconnect from their parents, they start to, if they haven't in the meantime got an emotional strong connection with someone else, they end up, that becomes their pattern for relationships. So they can emotionally check out from relationships at any time after that, but they've learned how to do it. They've learned how to be emotionally distant. And that was going to make every relationship in our child's life more difficult after that. It is good to be able to put a boundary on a relationship and say, okay, you're not treating me right, I'm going to leave that. But it makes it too easy for us to do that when our children are conditioned that even my parents I can't trust, so I'm not going to take any relationship too seriously. And you see a lot of that happening today with people going into marriages and relationships as, oh, this is a starter marriage. This is, we'll just live together. I'm not going to make any commitment, Yeah. And it's because they never had a truly committed relationship. Their parents weren't truly committed to being peaceful parents and having that bond with them. So they don't even know you can have a committed relationship. They've not seen it before.
Yeah, they don't know what it's supposed to look like. They don't know how it's supposed to feel, and it does create a sort of emotional blindness. And when we're building relationships, we want our kids to have emotional intelligence. We want them to be strong. We want them to have the capability to see threats, but also be vulnerable enough to allow good people into their life. And I think what we see now with a lot of how society's shaped around how we treat children, we have so many kids who struggle with emotional problems, whether it's depression or ADHD. And, all these things can easily be directed to childhood trauma and how kids are treated. It's hard for adults to overcome these things. Could you imagine if you're a young child and your brain's developing and all you're seeing and getting from your parents is emotional abuse, neglect, physical abuse? You're going to have a real hard time growing into a functioning adult who can have healthy relationships. So, as far as where peaceful parenting comes in, it's a lot of it is about prevention. So we want to do the work now so we can reap the benefits later. We want our kids, we want our kids to eventually be out on their own and have a good and healthy life. And at the same time, still be connected to us. I say we often, my approach was to parent for 20 years into the future. I used to always, when conflicts did arise, when things got heated or my kids weren't listening, I said to myself, how is this interaction going to go down? And if I do something bad or stupid now, could it affect my relationship with my kids in the future? So right there is perfect, for me to not proceed in a destructive way. And that's when we have to do the hard work. That's when we have to dig deep within ourselves. And we have to say, hey, I have other options. I have other outlets, right? I need to figure out how to solve this problem. It's not going to be easy, but what happens is I'll find the better solution, right? I'm not going to force my kid to brush his teeth or go to bed and demand he listen to me. I'm going to find ways to make it creative and fun. And you know what? Even if he doesn't brush his teeth tonight, no big deal. We could talk about it tomorrow. So it's about not getting hung up on the little things that are going to erode that relationship with your kid now and in the future.
So if you were a parent, let's say to the parents who are listening out there, and they said, I'm doing regular parenting. I'm hitting my kids for occasionally, maybe I didn't think it was abusive, but now I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, this is not really healthy the way I'm doing things. what process would you suggest parents go through? It's fine to say, okay, stop hitting, stop yelling, pay more attention to them, but is there a process? Should they apologize to the kids, or how should you implement this, especially in the initial stages?
Yeah, I think being honest is the best policy. So it does nobody any good if you're gonna beat yourself up for not parenting properly or not parenting based on good principles. If you do mess up, absolutely apologize to your kids. Let them know that you made a mistake and show them that you're going to correct it. And what happens is you have to stay on course, right? You can't just keep beating your kid and saying you're sorry, because what'll happen is you'll have them start to sympathize with their abuser, right? You're the person who's abusing them. And every time you do it, you make an apology. So it has to be honest. It has to be truthful. You have to tell your kid, listen, these are the things that we're going to start working on. I want to be a better dad, right? If I do something wrong, you let me know. I'm going to apologize if you feel mistreated. And that's where this is where you start the process. A lot of times fathers think, oh, well, I'm the parent. Why should I care what my kid thinks? You absolutely should, right? I have my own business. And in order for me to be successful in my business, I need to know if my customers are happy, right? I need my customers coming back. So same thing with being a father. If you want to get a good idea of how good you're parenting, talk to your kid about it. Ask them, hey, how am I doing as a father? Are you happy with this family we have? What could we do to make it better? Well, and what that does is that opens them up to say, hey, you know what? Dad cares about me, right? He's genuinely concerned about how I feel. And to me, that's part of the process of creating that deep connection. You're creating real intimacy, and you're not going to get it if you're not honest. You have to be truthful about what your mission is as a dad, and about what that family looks like that you want to create.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is sometimes too that when we do ask that question, they're going to give us feedback that we may not like, and we have to make sure that we kind of take it emotionally neutrally. Don't make a lot of reaction. Like if we're like, oh, so sad, they'll be like, oh, I don't want to make dad sad. Yeah, it's no big deal, Dad. Don't worry about it. When it really is a big deal. So the best is just really take it emotionally neutrally. And sometimes the feedback's actually quite hilarious. My son said to me that he doesn't like dad jokes. They're really irritating him. What he said was that when he comes to me and says, I'm hungry, and I go, hi, hungry, that really, he says, I don't feel like you're really listening to me. Wow. They want to eat all the time. He says, I don't feel like you're really listening to me. He said, when I come to say I'm hungry, he says, I'm really hungry. I just need something to eat. And I don't need a lot of I don't want a lot of jokes. He says, it really bothers me. So I've stopped doing that. And we actually made a deal because we used to play a lot of small practical jokes on each other. And it started to bother him out of the blue. He used to love them. Now it bothers him. So, okay, we're not going to do that anymore.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's like, he just decided that, he says, I want to take things more serious. He says, I want to be more serious, and I don't want so much joking. And none of those kind of dad jokes. He says they bother me. And yeah, so I think it was kind of funny, but it bothers him. So I'm going to take it seriously.
Of course. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is part of what he was doing, I think, is exercising a certain he was learning to set boundaries. Now, the boundary may have been set just for the purpose of him trying to practice setting boundaries. I don't know exactly what's going on in his head. But if it bothers him, then we have to respect that. Certainly, if we went to someone and said, look, I don't like that nickname you're calling me, or whatever it happens to be, and the person kept doing it to us, are we going to keep them in our life? Of course not.
Depends on how good a friend they are, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we might, and guys will often settle things with, we have our own ways of settling things. But very often we want to set these boundaries with what we've got in our life, and we want people to respect them, not because the boundary is such a big deal, but it's a respect for us. Anyone who's willing to blast past small boundaries you have would be willing to blast past a big one too. And so, I'm trying to teach him how to set boundaries with people, what's acceptable behavior, what's not, how we should let people treat him. So he tested out on the safest person he knows, dad. I can test it out on dad. It's safe to test these things out on dad. I'll set a boundary. And if we block them on that, then they're going to say, hey, I guess this boundary thing doesn't work, and they're going to give up on it. It's the same if you're teaching a dog to hunt rats. This dog trainer, he was explaining this to me. He says you can have two identical terriers and you can set them on the rats. He says if one gets bit on the first rat, he'll be shy of rats for the rest of his life. It'll traumatize him. He'll be imprinted on that I'm too scared of the rats, and he'll always be hesitant and he'll keep getting bit. On the other hand, the dog that goes right after the rat, has no fear and goes full after the rat and kills the rat on the first try, that's going to be a good dog, because he'll never fear the rats, because he'll be like, well, I killed the last one, I can kill this one too. And with our kids, it's the same thing. If they come to us and this is their first relationships are with their parents, and they try to have a natural social interaction with us, and it goes poorly because we don't let it work right, it starts to set that pattern in their head that, I guess, I just can't do that with people. I'm not capable of that. And I think for a lot of young men, they couldn't get their mom's attention. Now they can't get women's attention. There's a lot of women, they couldn't get protection from their father, and now they can't find a safe man to protect them and to give them what they need. And it's these early childhood relationships failing that leads to a lot of what's failing in society itself.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I mean, we want to teach our kids what a mutual and respectful relationship looks like. And we do that by allowing, just like you explained with your son, allowing him to have preferences, allowing him to express his needs and his desires. And what better way to do that with dad, because he knows dad, he can trust dad. So those are the building blocks. That's, you just set your kid up for emotional intelligence, healthy relationships in the future, because most dads would see that as a threat, right? If their kid said, hey, dad, don't do that, who are you? Who are you to say that to me? So I think that's excellent, man. That's a real good example of how we can continue to build.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been wonderful having you on today, and we're about at the end of our time today. Thank you very much. Where can people learn or find you and to follow what you've been writing? Because you write some excellent stuff for Peaceful Parenting.
Thank you. My website is peacefulfathers.com, and you can find me at Twitter at peacefulfathers. That's the two main things we're doing now. We're looking to expand and grow and continually push this message out there, how important it is to have strong fathers, to have fathers who are compassionate, respectful, and courageous. So peacefulfathers.com, that's the main blog right now. And we look forward to.
Excellent. Thanks. And I do have it in the description of the video. I have the link. So if anyone wants to go, they can find it there. It's just for the people on Periscope. It helps if we say it, because Periscope doesn't copy the links automatically. Thank you very much. And we're going to let you go now. And perhaps we'll have another chance to talk. And one day we'll meet up at 21 Convention.
Definitely. Thank you, Noah.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you for watching our video, and I hope it inspired you to take action in your life. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video to get more agency building content. The real secret sauce is in our newsletter. Click on the link in the video description below to sign up. I promise I won't flood your inbox, and anything that we do send you will be of high value.